Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today I'm going to be doing a level 80 overview of the Machinist job. Machinist has always been my favorite range to play, and it's probably going to be the same for this expansion again. Machinist got quite the overhaul, going from Stormblood into Shadowbringers, because a lot of people weren't happy with Machinist back in Stormblood. I was one of the few that probably likes playing it quite a lot. But I'm also quite happy with most of the changes that they made. There are a couple things that I'm not too big of a fan of, mainly regarding heat and the way hypercharge works now. But for the most part, I'm quite happy with what happened to Machinist. They did take out a bit of the RNG aspect of the game, which in retrospect is not a bad thing, because of how your skills interact with certain gauges now. So having it be tied to RNG would feel kind of bad now. But in general, Machinist feels really good. So let's go over their GCDs real quick, because there's actually not that many. So your normal combo is going to be your 1, 2, 3, which is split shot, select shot, clean shot. Looks like this. Each ability will generate 5 heat, and the final ability will also generate 10 battery gauge. What the battery gauge does, we'll talk about in just a bit. So that's just your standard 1, 2, 3. This is your filler combo that you'll always be using. You can interrupt this combo for stuff like drill, air anchor, and your hypercharge as well. So it's pretty free flow in that regard. Then your two other GCDs are indeed drill and air anchor. Drill is just a high damaging attack that just does damage. Drill is also a high damaging attack, does as much damage as drill. Air anchor, I mean, does as much damage as drill. But as an added benefit, air anchor will also increase your battery gauge by 20. Now, one other way that we can increase our gauges is by using barrel stabilizer. This will just give you 50 heat on your heat gauge. Now, to spend this heat gauge, we can only spend it on one thing, and that is hypercharge. To use hypercharge, you need 50 gauge, and when you use it, 2 new abilities become available to you. We have Heat Blast for single target. We have Auto Crossbow when it comes to AoE. Auto Crossbow does the same potency as Spread Shot. So when it comes to using Reassemble, which makes the next GCD that you use a critical direct hit, you can either choose to use it on Spread Shot or on Auto Crossbow. When it comes to AoE, when it comes to single target, you want to use Reassemble on either Drill or Air Anchor. So yeah, when we use Hypercharge, either Auto Crossbow or Heat Blast. Best thing to use is, of course, on Heat Blast when it's single target, because it also gives the added effect that it reduces the cooldown of Ricochet and Gauss Round by 15 seconds. Ricochet and Gauss Round are your 2 off GCDs that you're going to be spamming quite a lot. When I say spamming, I actually mean that you're going to be spamming them a lot. So you want to make sure that these are on cooldown, or not on, well, yeah, that they are on cooldown so that they don't have the maximum charges, because when you're going to be spamming Heat Blast during the hypercharge window, you're going to be getting charges back of these quite often. So I'm gonna spend some of the charges real quick. So we've now 0 charges left on these, and then when I use my hypercharge and my heat blasts, you're gonna see that I can get these charges back really quickly. There we go. So every time you use hypercharge, you can technically get 5 heat blasts in there, as long as you don't clip your GCD, and then that will result in a 75-second cooldown reduction, I guess. Or am I stupid? I don't know. What was it again? 15 seconds? 15 times 5 is 75, I guess. Hey, I can do maths. So yeah, that's a pretty big cooldown reduction, all of these moves. So basically, you will need to use one of these each, I think. Or actually, no, that's 90 seconds. So technically, if they're on full cooldown, you can use 5 heat blasts without ever having to use either of these during the heat blasts. But that's only an issue when you have high ping. So in general, you just use a heat blast, ricochet, heat blast, Gauss Round, heat blast, ricochet, heat blast, Gauss Round. Just to make it simple like that. When it comes to your priority, using Drill and Air Anchor on cooldown is your second priority. The highest priority is using Wildfire on cooldown. Wildfire has also been changed. So back in the day, it used to just be a buff that you put on the boss, and then all of the damage that you dealt to the boss in that duration would get amplified. for the Wildfire Explosion. Right now, Wildfire only cares about GCDs. So when you use Wildfire, you also want to be using Hypercharge, because Hypercharge gives you access to a faster GCD ability. I think it's kind of unfortunate, because it kind of pulls away from like the Wildfire being this one big burst where you put everything in that you have. Because right now it's legit just, let me just use Barrel Stabilizer for heat, Wildfire, then Hypercharge, and then you just spam this. Kind of messed it up there because I pressed the wrong button. But you get the idea, and then at the end, bam, it just explodes for some damage. On the other hand, it does make it so that Wildfire is very consistent damage, because back in the day it relied on you having all of your abilities up for Wildfire, and you also doing a lot of critical damage and all of that stuff to boost the Wildfire's damage, as it was a portion of the damage that you dealt that would be amplified. Right now, it's just you use this many GCDs, okay, Wildfire is going to do this damage. So that's where the consistency of Machinist is kind of better now, I guess you could say. But it doesn't feel as good, or at least not to me. It doesn't feel as rewarding to get those amazing hull Wildfires when you were able to crit all of your abilities inside the Wildfire window or something like that. So yeah, as I talked about, reassemble, just use it, and then the next GCD that you use is going to be a critical direct hit. So you always want to use this on either drill or air anchor. Since the cooldown is 55 seconds, it's always going to line up with either of these. Reassemble will come off cooldown before either of these are available, because this is 20 seconds and this is 40 seconds, skills with skill speed. So that's the reason why this is 55 seconds. It used to be 60, but during the raid patch they made it 55, so that you don't get weird alignments where drill comes off cooldown and you still have like 2 seconds on reassemble or something like that. So that's why it is like that. Some other skills we can briefly talk about are Tactician. This is your party mitigation tool. It's on a 3-minute cooldown, and it doesn't stack with the other ranged physicals defensive abilities like Shield, Samba, and Troubadour from Dancer and Bard respectively. So you basically just use that to mitigate damage. This is flat damage reduction by 10%. So this is incredibly good, as it works on everything except on the gravity attacks from E1. But another thing that makes this really good is you can use this in dungeons to help out your tank during a big trash pull, as it does just reduce the damage that everybody takes by 10%. It doesn't matter what kind of damage it is. Well, it can't be gravity damage, but that's just a very special type of damage. Something that also changed is Flamethrower. Flamethrower used to be an off GCD on a 60-second cooldown. Now it is a GCD on a 60-second cooldown. This does not do anything other than just do AoE damage, so you're only going to be using this during your AoE rotation. For the most part, you want to hold this, I believe, for like 4.5 seconds or something like that, to get like 2.5 ticks out of it. So basically you just use it for a few seconds, then you turn it off. That's pretty much it, because using it for the full 10-second duration is a DPS loss over just using something like your spread shot that you can use, just your spammable AoE. And of course, going into Hypercharge, we have auto Crossbow. During this does not lower the cooldown on these two abilities, so you can just spam this as much as you want. Of course, Ricochet is technically also an AoE ability, so you can use that as well. And then Bioblaster is kind of like the drill equivalent of your AoE. So when you use Bioblaster, drill also goes on cooldown. So you kind of make the choice. If you're doing single target, you use drill. When you use AoE, you use Bioblaster. So that's kind of how Machinist works. You just have your simple 1, 2, 3. You have drill and air anchor, which you want to be using on cooldown. Highest priority is using Wildfire on cooldown, because this does line up with raid buffs and such. And then, last but not least, we have our big cool turret. So let me use air anchor real quick to get more battery gauge, because this is the only thing that we use our battery gauge on, is the Automaton Queen. Before level 80 this will be called Rook turret, but they basically function the same way. Once you get 50 gauge, you're able to summon this. The duration that it stays active on the field depends on how much gauge you have, but it doesn't matter at what gauge you summon it. Because if you summon it at 50 gauge, it will do, let's say, 50 damage. But when you summon it at 100 gauge, it'll do 100 damage. Meaning that it doesn't matter when you summon it, you're always going to get the same damage for gauge spent. So it will scale exponentially. So the main reason if you want to optimize around this is you basically use it during raid buffs, as your turret, or your queen in this case, does get affected by raid buffs. So when you summon it, they'll start attacking the same target that you are. So since I'm not attacking anything, just standing around. So if I attack it, they'll start attacking. And then at the end, they'll do like a cool finishing move. Didn't stay out long, of course, because I only had 50 gauge. But if I would have had the full 100 gauge, it would have stayed out for a bit longer. So yeah, that's kind of Machinist. It's pretty straightforward. I'm gonna go and switch jobs real quick so I can show you the opener. The opener is incredibly double weaving intensive. Let me just switch back and forward real quick so that my gauges are reset, and then I can just show you a bit of its gameplay. So we start off with getting our stuff on cooldown, getting our heat gauge for our Wildfire, and going... Oh, actually I forgot to use drill. I should have actually used drill at the beginning. So I'm just gonna skip the drill usage because technically I should have used drill as my first GCD. But yeah, kind of looks like this. So you're just doing 1, 2, 3. You're using your Gauss round and ricochet whenever they're ready. Technically you also want to keep those during raid buffs, because when you use them under raid buffs you have of course the higher damage increases. And then when you have 50 gauge, that's when you can go into your hypercharge. And then you're alternating your heat blasts with these usages of ricochet and Gauss round. And then you make sure that you use your air anchor on cooldown, make sure that you use your drill on cooldown. As a general rule, you don't want to go into your hypercharge when there is about 9 seconds left on drill or air anchor. I think 9 seconds is like the latest that you can go into hypercharge. I'm not entirely sure about that, but it's something close to that. But yeah, Machinist is really cool. I quite like the aesthetic of the job this time. It feels like an actual Machinist now. That you have so many tools, you have your robots, you have all of these cool other little things that really add to the fantasy of playing a Machinist. And I actually quite enjoy it. I might not be super happy with how some of the mechanics work, mainly the hypercharge mechanic. Not a huge fan of that. And also the fact that you're actually overcapping on heat when you go into your second Wildfire. But yeah, those are just minor pet peeves. In general, when it comes to just the feel of the job, the look of the job, its theme, I'm absolutely in love with it. It plays really well. Pretty much everybody else of my friends that has tried Machinist now is like, wow, this might actually be my favorite ranged job to play, whereas they hated it back in Stormblood or Heavensward because of how clunky it used to be back then. So yeah, with that I think I've covered about everything there is to cover about Machinist. If you have any more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments and I'll get back to you. And yeah, that'll be it for me. So I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.